this time through goes better than last time, and I want to have the recording of it. So we got the funding, and it got 5 years to develop it, and so they hired me to do so, and I came along and just told the schools, tell me what you want. And while the consultation call with any questions is always an integral part of it, it's unsurprisingly not as vibrantly utilized as pediatricians who can close their door and not have someone just walk in on them anyway. So people can always call me or email me with any questions about anything, preferably mental health related, since that is what it's for. And generally I get lots of calls from nurses, obviously, school psychologists, administrators, not so much teachers, because of course they should be talking to you guys first. But if you had a teacher who was trying to figure out how to manage a kid in the classroom, rather than playing telephone with all the information back and forth, you can always tell them to call me. I just want to make sure that they're not contributing to any communication breakdown within any school or district. So there's the consultation piece. What schools said they really wanted more of, though, was an education piece of having professional development on mental health topics. And so I've proceeded to develop topics in response to what people request.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay.
How are you? I'm Jen.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm telling you guys who I am, like at Great Lake, because there's lots.
So yeah, the first year I had a few requested topics, and then the first summer I made just 6 topics on the things everyone ought to be asking for if they aren't, and this was one of them. But every year I add new topics based on what people have requested. So given that the program's going, into its 7th year, I've got almost 20 topics. All of them can be watched recordings of past webinars, because that's one of the insufficiently narrow silver linings of the cloud that was COVID, was that I learned how to do webinars. Hi guys. And
There's a camera with other people on it. That's a hood.
now she's embarrassed for having talked when she came. And so you can see recordings of any of them from before. You cannot get CEU credit for watching a recording, but I'm glad I've got the recordings, because I have people call with a consult, and I'm like, well, the easiest thing would be if you could just get the whole, curriculum about depression to answer how to deal with this, and now you can. As I was saying before I turned on everything, I'm having a little bit of struggle with SurveyMonkey in that you guys can get information from it, but it might not be willing to give information to me. So don't worry, the evaluation that's normally on SurveyMonkey, I have put on Google Forms, and the link is the same, because that was always, you go to SurveyMonkey to link over to another SurveyMonkey. Now it just goes elsewhere. But if you go to the materials request page on SurveyMonkey, there's lots of things there that you can just go ahead and download directly. A lot of the tools, the PowerPoints, the PowerPoint of resources that I have for each topic, and also the sheet that has all the links to the recordings. So you can go and get that without even having to wait for me to have time to send it to you. But if you end up wanting me to send you things, you might want to entrust that to an email instead, because I do not know if I'm going to get stuff out of SurveyMonkey. It's not SurveyMonkey's fault. SurveyMonkey is wonderful. They are my patron saint. They've gotten me through everything. It's a billing issue. So before I had some slides scrolling, and as we go through the presentation, there might be a letter number thing next to some of the images. Those are things that you can request if you just know them. Now, a lot of things did not fit in that, which is what these binders on the table are. The orange binder is the one that has the materials. If you want to go ahead and open it, you'll see that it's got in the front, it's got the front page, but then flip one page. You see all those thumbnails of all the different materials available, okay? The rest of it is full-size versions of ones that you can't really see very well there. So you can jot down whatever it is you want. There's even a form in the front of that for you to get it. People online, if you see something, you jot it down. Email me, because I don't know what's going on with SurveyMonkey. The other binders on the table, one of them is all the resources, not sorted by topic, the way this one is, and the other one is the med summaries. I don't know if any of you were in the program back when I was doing weekly nurse meetings, and I do the med of the week, and then I do a little one-page write-up about it. Those are also things that you can get on SurveyMonkey, on the materials request sheet. But since you're here and live, and I love live people, you can also flip through that and take take copies from there. There's like 4 or 5 copies of each med, so if you want to take, they are not to be like given to parents for information. They're really so clearly a nurse talking to other nurses. You can tell the moment you read one. And in other news, I wrote books. So they're over there. That's what we call the separation of the professional from the personal gain over there. So if you're interested, one's a young adult novel, and one's a medium adult novel, I don't know. But anyhow, I always bring those just in case. Not that I'm looking to like ever survive as a novelist, but it'd be nice. So, moving on to the topic. As I said, topics are what people say that they need to learn about, and I was psychic enough to go ahead and write this one before anyone requested it, because I figured people need to know this. So, we want to understand ADHD. Oh, come on. You said you were going to work before, Clicker. Don't you stop working on me, Clicker. Work now. It just need to get jump started. Hopefully it'll keep working. So, since I do grant CEUs to people who are watching me in real time, online or here, I do have to share my conflicts of interest and commercial bias. I've got no conflicts of interest or commercial bias to share, nor does my program. It is currently funded by the state, and so if you see, it'll ask on the evaluation, did I tell you I have none? Did I tell you my program has none? And or whether we did or not. And then the last one is, did you see any bias? They do mean commercial bias. So if you see anything in here that I could be turning a profit on, do let me know, because funding is always an interesting prospect. And you guys can get up and stretch, walk around all you like during it, because, you know, listening to me talk as fast as I can is potentially something that you don't want to stay sitting for. Folks at home, you can do whatever you want, no one knows. So, oh good, it's working now. Further disclosure, I'm so happy to see people in 3 dimensions. so, about a month before the lockdown, I had a presentation where it was an all-school one, but it was in an auditorium, and the teachers did what I'm sure they hate the kids doing. They all sat in the back third, and there was a spotlight, so I could not see another live human being in the room. And I came home going, oh, that's the most painful. I never want to talk. I never want to teach again where I can't see the people I'm talking to. And then a month later, so I'm sorry, it's my fault. I jinxed the universe. So, but now, I did remember to test this morning, and I was negative. I'm vaccinated and boosted once. And so, if anyone tests positive, remember to keep me in the loop. So, ADHD. Let's start with some stats. Okay? As we know, boys tend to get identified and diagnosed more commonly than girls, okay? We also, people might not know off the top of their heads, but English-speaking households have more diagnoses than immigrant households. This is quite possibly way more about access to care than about anything regarding the actual symptoms involved. Children in poorer homes also. They have, except here, it's kind of backwards, because they have a higher risk of being diagnosed. And there you start wondering how much of it might be the way people are looking at kids from different backgrounds, especially because the disparity, the difference in them, goes down with age. It's kind of like when it's a kid who's disruptive in elementary school, that kid's a problem, go get them diagnosed. When it becomes a junior might not get as high grades for going to college, suddenly the wealthier end of the spectrum starts getting more diagnoses. Maybe it's just a coincidence, okay? White children are more likely to get diagnosed. The interesting thing is, there's also some real disparity based on the race of the person doing the assessment, more than the race of the kid. And I've got a separate whole presentation about race. We can talk about that some other time. But what we've got here is numbers that have trended really high up over the course of less than a decade. It went up 42%. Okay, and I know these numbers are old, but they changed how they count them in 2016. So give me a few more years, they'll get us a new set of numbers that we can compare. But right now, 2016 is like a reset because, and we also kind of want to wait until after 2013 because that's when the DSM changed as well. So everything got shaken up a little bit. But when you see something increasing like this, it's either because there's more of it than there was before, or there was always a lot and now we're catching it more, or there isn't that much, and that's an artificial elevation from overdiagnosis. So it's more fun when there's lots of people here, but raise your hand if you think it's overdiagnosed. Raise your hand if you think it's underdiagnosed. Raise your hand if you think it's kind of both, depending on the kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, we want to look at exactly how do kids get diagnosed with this, okay? The diagnostic criteria, and if you've ever played with the DSM, that's a Diagnostic and Statistics Manual. That's our sort of cross between Bible or workbook or recipe book for mental illness diagnosis. It's a lot like doing an I-9 form. It'll be like you have to have 3 from this column and 2 from this column and everything in those columns to qualify, okay? So the setup for ADHD is that you have to have 6 or more symptoms. If they are really skewed towards the hyperactivity symptoms, then we would say the person has ADHD subtype predominantly hyperactive. If more of their symptoms are in the inattentive, then we would say predominantly inattentive, and if they are kind of a equal opportunity symptom person, then we'd say combined type. So for those who want to stay current on all the terminology, there's no such thing anymore as ADD. Everything is ADHD. So if you've got a person who's just completely distracted and not hyperactive at all, they have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, predominantly inattentive type. And so that's how you theoretically go and take the hyperactivity back out of the identifier. I tend to not really worry about the hyperactivity word. As you will come to notice, I'm bothered more by the disorder word in that diagnosis. So they have to have these symptoms in 2 or more settings. This again gets a little tricky because lots of times parents will be like, they're fine at home, it must be something school's doing wrong. And if you ever visited the home, the kid is bouncing off the walls, but everyone's okay with that because they don't have to get them to sit and focus and absorb material for 6 hours. You know, if you've got, you know, it's kind of like saying, my leg is fine, it didn't hurt at all when I was sitting on the couch. It's like, no, if you need to use the attention and you don't have it, then that's a problem. So, but we do want to make sure that it is something that's with the kid wherever they are and not something that only comes up in one setting and the kid is perfectly able to have adequate focus everywhere else. They need to have symptoms prior to age 12 because it is kind of it is not something that develops later in life. It is also not something that disappears later in life, which is something that the insurance companies are not quite down with. A lot of my private practice is adults with ADHD, and a lot of my unpaid time is spent doing prior authorizations on any stimulant med on anyone over 18 because insurance companies hope that it would just kind of disappear. So if you get my newsletter, you could tell that that was how I spent one day, and I was pissed, and that's why I wrote that. So, but very importantly, it has to be causing problems. This is true of everything in the DSM. Everything in the DSM says causes clinically significant distress or dysfunction. So people who are all anti-psych and saying, why are you going around, you know, slapping these insulting diagnoses on people for things that are just normal life? It's like, okay, first of all, diagnosis is diagnosis. It's not an insult unless you decide to make it one. And it's so that you can access care. If you have no interest or need to access care, then it totally doesn't apply, it doesn't matter. You know, and there are many people where once they get to be an adult and they don't have someone saying that they have to sit in a classroom for 6 hours every day, they can have the things in their life that keep their brain engaged such that they don't really need to be treated, even if they continue to have ADHD symptoms well into adulthood. There's also people where they don't even notice the symptoms until adulthood, because as long as someone's telling them what to do, they're fine, but once they go home and they've got to somehow keep track of the bills and the this and the that and all that, that's when things fall apart.
Then how easy is it for them to get meds at the adult age then?
Totally depends on who they're talking to and whether the person likes to recreationally yell at insurance companies. I have one where they're like, did he have it before age 12? I'm like, the dude's 60. It was not invented before he was age 12 or recognized.
Even our age group.
Oh, yeah,
It wasn't really
absolutely.
It wasn't really
Yeah,
popular.
And like, he had the symptoms, but they were not recognized, that does not mean, so it depends on when you, but whenever I've got one of my adult clients transitioning, I say, even among prescribers, you'll get people who will say, well, I'm not gonna prescribe for you unless you go and get a neuropsych test, because that's really easy to get as an adult, right? When you've got money to burn and endless amount of time. And so I tell them, call the place and ask them about stimulant meds for ADHD, and if they start hemming and hawing, then just call the next person on your list. You're not gonna be able to change their minds, you just wanna find someone who actually believes that ADHD exists above the age of 18. Nothing in the DSM says that you outgrow that sucker, so I don't know how insurance companies can get away with that. Anyway, we also want to make sure that what they have is ADHD and not caused by something else. So that's where if you've got a kid who did not appear to have it until junior high or high school, it could be either that no one was noticing because life was life, or it could be that now what they've got is anxiety or depression that is messing with their concentration and giving them symptoms that could mimic it. The tricky thing is they are allowed to have both. You can collect the whole set if you want when you get to the DSM, and an awful lot of kids with ADHD do have comorbidities, okay? The number one is conduct disorder. This is DSM's gift to people who just want to have something to label kids who behave badly. So it's not a hugely clinical experience, it's mostly just because they're too young to call them antisocial personality disorder. So, but when you get into anxiety, depression, autism spectrum, and curiously, Tourette syndrome, you got a lot of comorbidity, and it gets tricky of like figuring out which one you've got, and if they've got both, how do you treat it? Generally, if we think both are there, we would treat the ADHD first, because an awful lot of the time, they are anxious because they're worried about screwing up, forgetting things, and making mistakes. And once their attention is improved and the ADHD symptoms are not as bad, they stop screwing up and forgetting things quite so much, and the anxiety goes down. Similarly, a lot of the depression can be due to how people react to their symptoms. So there's that logic for treating the ADHD first. The other one is just pragmatically, the treatments for anxiety and depression take weeks to show whether or not they're working. Whereas ADHD meds, you pretty much know by lunchtime if that one is going to be effective for that kid. So that's how we proceed with that. So the criteria that we mentioned in that first bullet point include, and this is part of how the DSM-5 improved over the previous one, and also why we will have numbers going up among girls, because in the old one, it still said that you needed, 6 from one side or the other. And the hyperactivity side had like 10 symptoms to choose from, and the inattention side had 6. So you had to have 100% of the symptoms for inattention to be diagnosed with ADD, back when there was that distinction. So they evened those up a little bit, and since girls tend to present more with inattention than the hyperactivity, I imagine we'll be seeing numbers tracking up with girls being diagnosed more because they were not getting diagnosed before. But when we get to whether or not it's overdiagnosed, underdiagnosed, or what, we got to look at some of these. Even though they are theoretically designed to be something that can be identified by people outside the kid, because they are expecting it to be a kid being diagnosed. You look at depression, and a lot of it is, how are you feeling, tell me, and it's subjective things because we don't have lab tests for that. Even though they are external, they are not objective. These are still just as subjective, because look at this. Let's see, excessive running or climbing. Anyone know what is exactly the correct amount of running or climbing that is the appropriate degree of running or climbing that someone might be exceeding? A lot of these are kind of, are you identifying it, or are you, frustrated with the person? And not saying that it's bad to be identifying this, but recognizing that if you've got a kid who was not diagnosed before, that does not mean that they should never be diagnosed in the future, because depending on how a person subjectively approaches these, the person who looked at the kid before might have over or underdiagnosed what they saw in that kid. So the main thing is, you look at all these things and say, is it causing a problem? Is it making this kid's function decreased. You know, their social function, their academic function, their ability to function. There's all kinds of assessment tools. If you want to be really nice to families and you want them to actually be following through on things, you get the Vanderbilt one or any of them. They all will have a parent one and a teacher one. You go ahead and fill that out and give it to them to take to the pediatrician, because otherwise they get an appointment with the pediatrician, and then after the appointment they come home with the form to send it to, and it's like, how many weeks do you want this process to take? As opposed to, if that's why you're encouraging them to go to the pediatrician, you might as well give them the information right up front. The thinking skills one is interesting because it's assessing exactly how it's getting in the way of doing stuff and what you can do about it. So that's why I include that one. Now, people always, once you've got something that's diagnosed as being a problem, they want to know who to blame. You know, what caused this, okay? And we, if we choose to go ahead and engage in that kind of stigmatizing discussion of it, we do think that it definitely, I mean, they say likely genetic, but it clearly has a strong genetic tendency, shall we say. A lot of the adult clients that come into care as adults, it's because when their kid gets referred by the school and gets diagnosed, the parents having flashbacks on their own childhood and realizing that they also had it. It was just back before anyone recognized it, and gee, maybe their adult life might be helped by being treated as well. So it appears to be sort of a delayed or a different maturation of the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is up here, you know, kind of the critical thinking. Anyone watch Rugrats cartoon show?
I used to, not as much, not recently.
I love Rugrats. Okay, Rugrats is a bunch of, you know, toddlers that have no supervision for most of their lives. But anyway, the prefrontal cortex is the character Chucky, who's always the one going, I don't think that's such a good idea. And when you don't have the prefrontal cortex working and doing that for you, then your whole life is just filling little saying, let's go do that. Yeah. So it also is very possibly a functional variation of what normal is. So that's why I hate it when people are calling it a disorder or saying someone's not normal. I love that someone wrote a really nice memoir about growing up diagnosed with ADHD and how stigmatizing that was, because people have the idea of you should be normal. And so this is why we're really trying to get people to stop. I mean, I'd always, any student that would say something using the word normal or abnormal, I'd say, we don't use the N-word in here. We will use functional or dysfunctional. We will use helpful or unhelpful, or you know, things that are making their lives better or worse. But everybody on the planet is normal. You just need a broader definition of normal, okay? One thing we could say, though, because we do want to make a distinction between people who are harder to manage or having a harder time managing it themselves, is using the term neurotypical. Of saying, okay, there are brains, the majority of brains function in this way. If we've got a brain that functions in a different way, then it is not neurotypical. Does not necessarily mean that it's abnormal. There's a lot of geniuses out there that are not normal, but we love having them around because they invent really cool stuff, don't we? So, neurotypical instead of normal. Now, the real good thing to focus on is what is it not caused by? It is not bad parenting. It's not if you just spanked your kid more when they were a baby, then they would be listening to the teacher better. That's not how it works. It's also not the kid not trying hard enough and being lazy. And it's not caused by diet, at which point people are like, yes, but what about red dye 3? What about what? Sugar. Absolutely, sugar must cause it, right? I love that someone did this study, okay? They took a bunch of kids. I don't even know if the kids had ADHD or not, but they just took any kids and gave half of them a really high sugary drink and the other half a sugar-free drink. And then they told the parents, okay, take them home. You gotta love it when the hard part happens at home, and then they get to report back to you on how their behavior was. And they told the parents what they'd given them, but they did lie to half the parents. So, unsurprisingly, the parents who were told their kids had sugar, and the kids had had a lot of sugar, they came back the next day saying, why did we sign up for this? You do not pay enough for the night we had last night. They had terrible behavior. Whereas the parents who lucked into having the no sugar group, or at least believed they did, their kids were fine. But the real question is, between these two, which do you think had worse behavior? Raise your hand if you think it was the kids who had sugar. And raise your hand if you think it was the parents thought the kids had sugar. I did kind of set up the question. I mean, trust, if I'm writing an exam, I do not telegraph the answer that much. But basically, yeah, it was the parents who were told that the kids had sugar reported worse behavior, even if the kids had not had sugar. And it's not that they were lying or exaggerating, but when you think about it, if someone is riding your ass every second about worrying that you're going to be a monster, just the stress of that is going to make you have more behavioral problems. So when we talk about ADHD though, what are we even talking about with attention? Because one thing is, the other word, the second worst word in the diagnostic name, disorder, I hate the most. The next one is deficit, okay? ADHD is not a deficit of attention. They have attention. They just don't aim it well. They're paying attention to everything. And whatever is more engaging is where the rest of their brain goes, rather than what they're supposed to be paying attention to. Okay, I love this quote here. I don't lack the ability to focus. I have super mind powers that lets me focus on multiple things at once. So take that, boring normal brain people. Very few people have that kind of ADHD. It's really kind of fun when some people do in a family and some people don't. My daughter and I like to sit and have a conversation where both of us are talking at the same time about different things and responding to what the other one said, and we just do it until my husband starts crying and leaves the room. So different brains work in different ways, but what we're generally looking for is the ability to aim your focus, okay? And to do that, you have to pay attention to the right thing. You also have to ignore everything else. You know? And if you think about it, if you went to a class and the teacher came in the first day and said, okay, you're going to have a test at the end of the week, it might be on what I'm telling you. It might be on what's in the book. It might be on what I was wearing each day. It might be on who was sitting in what chair each day. It might be on what interruptions happened during the day. It might be on what the weather was. How would you go through that week trying to pay attention to everything because you don't know what importance is? And that can be the subjective experience when you've got ADHD, that your brain wants to pay attention to everything at once because it doesn't know what important is. So the other thing, aside from ignoring, and the competing stimulus might be other stuff in there, it might just be the competing stimulus in your brain. You know, the amount of time you spend telling your brain, yeah, never mind about that. You know, I might reference a movie and that reminds you that you saw a movie last week, and there's all kinds of layers of your brain that keep you from interrupting me to tell me about the movie you saw. Because even though that internal stimulus happens, you are able to ignore it in order to focus on the matter at hand. There's also accessing your working memory, because if you've got that many things crowding the shelf of your brain, things fall off. Not always the things that you don't need, and therefore, you know, what you learn very early on with someone with ADHD is you do not give them a 3-step instruction unless you really only care about step 1 getting done. Because 2 and 3 will not still be in their brain by the time they need to, you know, get to them. It's also a matter of organizing your tasks. And this is one where you can talk to people with ADHD and they can tell you which one of these 3 steps they specialize in dysfunction in, okay? There is putting your tasks in the best order, deciding what to do at any given time. And then there's getting going with it. And then there's, okay, let go of it and move on to something else. You'll get lots of people saying they can't have ADHD because they sit there and do thus and such for hours on end. Video games, very commonly. But it isn't always video games. It can be a paper that you're really interested in. It can be, you know, for me it's spreadsheets, I don't know why. Something about the vertical and horizontal lines are just soothing to my brain on some level. And thus we have what's called hyperfocus, where the person will just have a very, very difficult time transitioning to the next thing. So when we're trying to choose the prioritization, we would like to know that important things are what happen first, okay? But urgent does not mean important. important. Urgent means right now. But you know how you read that and you think, oh, but I thought urgent was important. Yeah, that's what your brain thinks too. Your brain thinks anything right now must override it. So you're hardwired to really want to be doing that. So things that are important and urgent, they tend to happen without much problem, okay? The things that are not important, not urgent, yeah, maybe they happen, maybe they don't. No one really cares, okay? But we would like to have the things that are not urgent but important take precedence over the things that are unimportant but right now. You know, we would like to exercise for future health, or maybe save for retirement, or work on that paper that's due next week. But if I'm getting texts from my friend about a movie they're seeing while I'm trying to write my paper, the fact that the phone chirps and says, right now, I mean, this conversation is not going to be happening later. If you want to be in the conversation, you got to show up now. The brain narrows in on that as being what needs to be focused on instead. And again, you'll be able to see different people have different issues with these. You know, I would have problems with my husband all the time because if I had a 2-second question to ask him, my brain says it should not interrupt his work at all because of course he must be doing his work, listening to music, watching TV, and able to hear my question all at the same time. His brain does not do that. His brain is one thing, and once it's derailed, it will take a long time to go back. So my 2-second question, I have to decide, is it worth taking like 20 minutes away from his productivity? Because for him to answer it and then get back in the groove he was in is going to take a big amount of time. You know, he was advised that shifting gears can work better if you like stop, take a breath, shift, stop, take it, and that would be a more efficient way than just being like scrambling for it. So now if I go in with a brief question, he'll be like, what? We're working on it, okay? He means well. Oh, come on. Oh yeah, that's it. I forgot I have more animation about what things we'd like to have go important. And that's what our brain does. So how well do you pay attention? This is the thing for everybody to play along on, okay? We're going to watch a video briefly. And you are focused on the exceedingly tedious task, as are most tasks in school when you're a child, of counting how many times the people wearing white shirts are passing the ball. There's people in black shirts, people in white shirts that they're moving around and passing the ball. You just want to know how many times white-shirted people pass the ball. So.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is
So, among the things that are important that ADHD can do that lots of other people can't, what'd you get for the number? I tried to stop it before you gave the answer. Who got it right?
Not exactly right, close.
Yeah. Folks online, if you want, you can share with each other in chat what you got. But there's lots of things that are really good about an ADHD brain, which is why I'm talking about it as being a potentially very functional, depending on the context, of things that would be really handy to have someone with a brain that can do it. And among the really good things that a brain with ADHD can do is they can notice if a gorilla walks through your basketball game. Did anyone see the gorilla?
There was a gorilla that walked by and beat his
Now we gotta go back and prove it because
The monkey
people don't
business
believe it.
illusion.
Okay, let's watch this again.
count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Probably the last time there was one person in the room who didn't see it, and everyone was laughing at her so much. That's why I had to rearrange the next slide to not have the answer at the bottom because she was going nuts. Like, why is it written
Oh my gosh.
Oh, look
I did
at it.
not see that.
Yep. because you're very good at screening out extraneous stimuli. You were told to look at people
The
wearing
correct
white.
answer is
You were told to ignore people wearing black. Okay? But if you are a hunter-gatherer society, you probably would like to have a few brains that are not modern world neurotypical, because they're the ones who are going to notice threats more. They're the ones who are going to be very helpful to the community as a whole surviving. The ability to sit and focus on something and screen out other stuff is very useful, and so is the inability to do so. Because you don't want it to be that you're only going to notice threats when you are planning to notice threats. You need to have that be something where, even though I'm trying to focus on what I'm doing here, my brain notices things that pass by in the periphery. So among the things that the brain can do better when it's got ADHD are things like multitasking and switch tasking. And we always think of multitasking as multitasking, and no one can do it. In reality, everyone can do it somewhat. Multitasking is using different parts of your brain. So like listening to music while you write a paper is multitasking. For some people, that works fine. In fact, for some people, that's the only way to be able to do it. Okay? Switch tasking is trying to get the same part of your brain to do two things at once. So like listening to a book on tape while writing a paper is not going to go as well. If you've got something with words and something with words, you're drawing on the same part of the brain too much. Which is why, like, having a conversation on text while you're trying to get stuff done is switch tasking. And people do not do that very well. One thing that is universal, neurotypical and neuroatypical alike, is that everybody overestimates how well they do both of these. With ADHD, depending on your type, you might be more able to multitask. You might be so able to multitask that you cannot function without multitasking. And that's where you get the kids who don't do well in class, but then you give them a fidget toy, and they do better. I got so much better when I started bringing sewing or knitting to classes. The amount of notes I took went way up, because it gave me the filter of, is this worth writing down? I'm listening to everything they say while my hands are occupied. And then I would think, okay, this is worth writing down, so I put it down to write it. Whereas before, I was just trying to write everything, and then eventually giving up and writing letters to friends, and otherwise just not hearing anything the teacher said for the last 3/4 of each class. So for some people, multitasking is necessary for them to be engaged in what's going on, which again is something that a lot of classrooms do not recognize. Other things that you'll see with kids with ADHD is enthusiasm. Part of that impulsivity is that, if you call someone up to come over for the evening, it's kind of annoying if they have no impulsivity, because then they're like, well, wait, let me go check, and nothing really happens. Whereas, yeah, sure, I'm there, which sometimes is not great, because they might have had other things they were supposed to be doing. But there's a good side and a bad side to most of these things. Curiosity. Finding unexpected connections is huge. If you've got 15 things rattling around in your brain at the same time, they bounce off of each other, and sometimes they stick in new and interesting ways. So huge amounts of creativity and finding creative connections to things. And as I said, hyperfocus, the ability to just do that for hours. I mean, there are kids and adults where you're like, I need to pee, but I need to do this. There are kids who will forget to eat all day long because they're really engaged in something. And perfectionism. I don't know how much of that is intrinsic to ADHD and how much of that is desperately trying to make up for all the times they've been told that they're broken, wrong, bad, stupid, and otherwise. So I love having positive things to share with people about ADHD. I know that one's autism, but it's really cool. Because you gotta go looking to find these. It's kind of easy to find all of these. These sorts of things are what the kids see all the time in every interaction they have with people. And their parents also get slammed. Ritalin, so much easier than parenting. No wonder parents might be reluctant to have their kid diagnosed if they feel like, yeah, and that's going to say that I'm a bad parent, that I had to get this. And this one down here, back in the day, was called daydreaming. No, it's diagnosed. I don't care what you call it. That kid is not learning that material. And if that's going to cause major problems in life, maybe there's a problem. When we're talking about different settings, you might have a kid where one year they seem symptomatic and the next year they don't. If you look at the teachers, you can see why. It's like, like, okay, if you got one teacher who's teaching in a manner that engages this kid's brain, they might pass for being completely symptom-free. Another teacher who is very, rigid and otherwise. And the thing is, should you medicate that? Well, unless you're going to be able to get the teacher to change, maybe yes. Same as you get going, you might be like, these are the days that I need more treatment, these are the days I don't need more treatment. It's kind of like, when do I need my reading glasses and when do I not? I have some college students where they're like, yeah, I need the med on that day because I'm taking a test, I don't need the med on that day. Or I need the med for this class and not that class. And that's the same kid who was able to say, yeah, I take notes on the computer in the engaging class. The boring class, I need to take notes by hand because if I've got that computer open, I'm not going to be listening to the teacher because they're not as engaging. It's kind of hard to break it to the teachers that they're not always fascinating. They really want to be fascinating 100% of the time to everyone. But because they aren't, and instead it's easier to say there's something wrong with this kid that they are not listening to me, even though I'm just as fascinating as I ever was, you end up with like a third of them end up not finishing school. This is really not okay. They're more likely to be bullied. They're also more likely to bully others. And unsurprisingly, parents might not continue to get along very well. There's statistically notable increase in divorce rates among families where the kids have ADHD. So the impact. You look at all these, and poor school performance, that one could be intrinsic to the symptoms. Everything else is really kind of what's done to these kids because they have the symptoms. So most of the comorbidities that we see in ADHD are really due to living with constant criticism, which is not necessarily fix that teacher and everything's fine. It can also be, I have a hard time making friends. I have a hard time being, of just the constant impact the symptoms have on the socio-behavioral activity dynamics of what they need to do. And so if it's that, yeah, you need to go to school and you need to learn stuff, and stuff is hard to learn because you have attention deficit disorder, then yeah, that might lead to you being depressed. If you didn't have to go learn the stuff, then you might not be as depressed. Of course, the answer is not to say, okay, don't learn this stuff, but recognizing how much of it comes from the impact of the environment. And a big part of this is trying to pass for normal, because there is that idea that if you've got ADHD, you're broken, you're bad, you're abnormal. My son, when he was 4, was in a preschool class, and he, for his birthday, he wanted everyone in the class invited, but not Bobby, because Bobby's bad. I'm like, I gotta meet this kid, because my son, obviously likes everyone. And so I go to check out what the class is. I go and sit in for the class one day, and they come and they do circle time every morning, where all the kids are sitting in a circle, and they, one at a time, 19 kids, will get up and point at their initial on the alphabet chart on the wall. My son's birthday is in March. They've been doing this since September. And most of the kids are like, yes, okay. My son would switch it up by letting them guess whether he's going to do his first name, middle name, last name, or his nickname. We kept him a little bit engaged. And Bobby was just fidgeting, as was I. And at one point, the teacher's like, fine, Bobby, go sit over there. And I'm like, okay, maybe, stigmatizing, but maybe it's giving him space to move around more. But no, over there was sitting in a chair instead of on the floor with the aide sitting next to him saying, keep your feet like this and put your hands here. I guess they couldn't afford a straitjacket in that size. It's like, what are you doing to this kid? Well, you're teaching him and everyone else in the room that he's bad. That there's something wrong with this kid that is not acceptable to us. So if you know that squirming is going to get you stigmatized like that, you would do anything to avoid looking like that. And so it's not just changing your behavior for the environment. We all do that. If you're in a movie theater, you try not to cough or you talk softly. But imagine if it's 24/7 every minute of your day, you're not just adjusting your behavior, you are trying to adjust who you are. Because your behavior is going to reflect who you are. They're going to find out that you're one of those people who's not normal. There's also, you end up setting a higher bar for yourself because everyone else sets a higher bar are for you too. You know, like the parents with the kids with the sugar, who will be, the moment you put one toe out of line, oh no, here comes trouble, now I'm going to be riding the case for the rest of the day. So, recognizing that. So what do we want to do for these kids instead of just calling them bad and not letting them go to birthday parties? Meds do work, okay? So it frequently makes sense to start with those. Not because that's the start and end and all there is for it. There's lots of other things that work as well. But that involves learning skills and strategies. If you got a kid who's having a little trouble with the whole learning thing, they might not be terribly able to learn skills and strategies until you do something to bring their attention a little bit more into a functional level. And they are wildly successful, very effective, and have been around long enough that we know what they do. Unfortunately, they've been around long enough that people have generated all kinds of myths and ideas of why they shouldn't give it to them. You know, one is, you know, it's just like giving your kid cocaine. It's exactly the same thing. It's like, okay, it is a different chemical. I mean, yes, it has some of the same subparts of the compound, but those subparts make a difference. You know, there's like one acetyl group difference between aspirin and antifreeze. Okay, so the fact that it has a lot of the same parts does not mean it's the same thing, and even if it was, having it be precisely dosed to exactly the right amount is worlds different from just going and sticking your face in a pile of meth. So they'll say, well, it's making them drug addicts because you're giving them meth. Studies actually show higher substance abuse rates in adults who were not treated for ADHD when they had it, which just totally makes sense. I mean, one thing is, people will frequently abuse substances in order to self-medicate. You know, it might be that, yeah, and when I drink lots and lots of coffee, which technically is a drug, even though it's legal, then I don't have as many ADHD symptoms. It's like, yeah, wouldn't it be nice if you could actually have that be accurately dosed instead of just how strong is the coffee today, give it a, you know, crapshoot approach to it? There's also the fact that you've got a disorder that causes impulse control problems. Not surprisingly, if your impulse is not controlled, you are more likely also to abuse substances. Then there's the people who say you should just fix it with food. You know, change the nutritional supplements instead. Now, there are studies out there showing that there are kids who have disorders, various disorders, and also have deficits in certain nutrients. And those studies show that if you replace the missing nutrients, the symptoms might get better. There's no study out there that says a kid who doesn't have a deficit taking extra is going to get over whatever they've got going on. There's also the fact that even if we did know that this supplement is great, FDA doesn't monitor it the same, and so you're not entirely sure what's in it. It's like the people who come in saying that they're taking 20 milligrams of melatonin every night. I'm like, I highly doubt that, and I'm really glad, because your brain normally makes 0.3 milligrams a night. So if you were actually flooding it with that much melatonin, you'd like never be able to sleep without that pill ever again in your life, because your brain would totally give up on making any. So, and then there's the people who are like, they can just do the skills and strategies. It's like, I'm not saying do meds only, so please don't say do skills only. You know, ideally you come with some combination, and you might find that, yeah, this person's symptoms are at a level or in a situation where skills and strategies are sufficient. But if there's someone whose symptoms are either greater or the expectations, they've got a teacher that wants everyone to be all the time, or whatever, then meds might be something that they need to be able to be successful. So, you know, lots of environments you cannot change, so. There we go. Yeah, I love that poster of pills don't teach skills, but I do want to point out that skills are something you learn. And if the person's learning is really being inhibited, it might be hard. This is a great video. So let's watch this video now.
What I want to say to my mom, who drugged me, thank you. Thank you for listening when I told you I was struggling. Thank you for standing up for me when Dad tried to dismiss what I was dealing with as normal. I now understand ADHD is highly genetic, and it's likely he felt that way because he probably had ADHD himself. Thank you for taking me to get a proper evaluation so I can understand my brain's differences and don't feel like it's just all my fault. Thank you for taking me to a psychiatrist month after month to find a treatment and dose that worked for me, and for taking me back month after month after month after month. I know you were busy, and yet I never ran out of medication because you took the time to take me to every appointment. Thank you for ignoring the people who judged you. I know that there were many. Thank you for understanding that there was a difference between my sister occasionally forgetting her homework and me losing or forgetting something every single day. Thank you for understanding that while all children can be fidgety or impulsive or distracted, I struggled way more than the other kids my age. I now understand it's because ADHD brains develop differently. You didn't know that. You didn't have the research that I have, but you listened to me when I told you that I needed help, and you listened to me when I told you that it worked. Because of you, I got the treatment I needed. I did better in school, I felt more confident and able to reach my potential. I was lucky. Because of you, I never had to self-medicate like so many ADHDers I know. I never sank into depression. I never gave up on myself. I never felt misunderstood. You understood. You believed me. And when you did, when you took me to a doctor who could explain to me what was going on in my brain, you took away so much shame. Thanks, Mom.
We can hear it in the library. That's ours.
That's called reducing the volume on the barn door after the horse has bothered the people in the next room. So as you can see, there's a bunch of videos that she makes. That is Jessica McCabe, and she has the best YouTube channel on the planet. It's called How to ADHD. She also did a TED Talk at one point. And it's got wonderful, brilliant strategies that can be useful for everyone, but are very, very useful for people with ADHD. And lots of the links in the link section are to her videos. But it's How to ADHD. If you just look for that on YouTube, and you'll recognize the yellow worded banners for all of her things. And you just go in and play, or you look at the links that I have at the end and start following those. So anyway, so the meds we're talking about. There are 2.5 kinds of meds that we use for ADHD. We'll start with the first one people think of are the stimulant meds. Now, stimulant meds, there are 3 different families. There's the Ritalin family, the amphetamine family, and the dextrine family down here. So everything else within each family is just a matter of duration, dose, and whether or not they can swallow pills. You know, some are a patch, some are very long acting, some are liquid, some are pills, you know. A really interesting one up here is Journey. Good luck getting any insurance to pay for it because it's brand new. That is a delayed action one. Give it at bedtime, it does nothing for about 6 to 8 hours or whatever, and then it starts just before the kid wakes up. That is so wonderful for the kids where once they've woken up, it's already too late. Or by the time the med kicks in, your morning is already a train wreck. So if someone doesn't have good success, they've either got side effects that they can't tolerate or it just doesn't work for them, then try one of the other families because they are distinct enough. So I've had people who come in and say, oh yeah, he tried that Ritalin and it didn't work, so he can't take meds. Like, okay, Ritalin didn't work. There are 2 other families you could check out instead that might work. So you find out which one works, find the right dose, and then the duration, you know, we adjust which med to give based on what fits their lifestyle, basically. So that's where you've got the short-acting, the immediate release ones is what I always will start with, just to find out does it work at all. That's how you know by lunchtime if it works. You know, and yes, it's going to continue to evolve as the kid gets used to what it's like having that support, but you really do kind of know on the first day. I had a student who was anxious because the school was recommending that her son be assessed for ADHD, and her family was saying, how dare you drug your child, you're a bad mother. And she was feeling a little bit caught, and I was like, well, you could give it a try. It's not like you've got to be on it forever before you know whether it was worth it. And so she got it from the pediatrician, and the next week when she came to clinical, she was practically in tears because he came home the very first day he took the Ritalin in the morning. He's like, Mommy, the teacher didn't yell at me once today. And she realized that he thought it was him. He thought it was just him. that he was a bad kid. Because he can look around and he can see that the teacher speaks nicely to everybody in the classroom. But from the point of view of a kid with ADHD, the teacher asks them for something and they don't hear it. So a teacher asks again, more firmly, and they don't hear it. By the third time, the teacher's pissed and like, come on, I said to. And that's the first they've heard of it. So from their point of view, the first thing the teacher always says to them is already short-tempered and annoying. It must just be that I'm bad because I can, you know, my attention lets me see how she interacts with everyone else, and she's not like that with everyone else. Yeah, go ahead.
I always had a question on how, like, so when you think about these kids and we're giving them a stimulant, right, and they're hyperactive or their attention's out, I never could understand how it works in the brain where the stimulant would actually, like, clear things up for them.
Have you ever been on the computer and you've got like 15 tabs open? Imagine if you could not click to say which one is showing, but they were just kind of constantly coming on and off all the time, and you're trying to learn something from maybe two of them. The stimulant meds close a bunch of those tabs, so that now you might have 3 open instead of 50. And so a lot of the hyperactivity is the brain following, or the feet following the brain around. Oh, I see that, and so I go and I do that. Whereas the part of the brain that could, you know, that can screen out that attractive thing over there and stay focusing on this, then the kid's not going to be moving over to do that.
Because we think about when we take a stimulant or have a strong coffee, we're like more hyped up, right?
They call it stimulant, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
It's very much affecting the dopamine in the brain,
okay.
which is also the reward circuit and all kinds of. It's very. I try to avoid going into the chemicals too much because
Yeah,
I've got better things to think about. But side effects that are common for all of them, though, are appetite suppression, which is a problem. We've got a kid that might be kind of scrawny because eating involves sitting still for too long in the first place, and we help them sit still longer by giving them something that makes them not interested in the food in front of them after all. So it can be a problem, but not a huge problem, not as huge as people think. You know, you'd be checking that they aren't like losing weight, but even if they are on the thinner side, some studies have shown that maybe they might be a centimeter shorter than they would be as an adult than they would have been otherwise. But they catch up, because at some point testosterone trumps Ritalin every time. So they will catch up on growth. You do need to tell them to, you know, first of all, you start with the younger kids, you're telling the parents that, okay, if you've got a kid who needs the stimulant med for getting through homework, and they finish homework and now it's time for dinner, and they're not interested in dinner, unsurprisingly, because they are still have the stimulant med there so they can get the homework done. And then 2 hours later, as it's almost bedtime, they're asking for a snack. The answer is, give them a snack. You feed them whenever they are hungry. You might try to adjust dose times if you can to minimize how much med is in them at meal times. You know, when I had kids with the lunchtime med, I'd have them come on the way to lunch, not 20 minutes before. I mean, it's the lunchroom. They're not going to be paying attention to the food anyway, but at least I'm not going to get in the way of them paying attention to the food and give it to them so it doesn't kick in until after they've at least had a chance to be hungry. As kids get older and they're more in charge of their own lives, you might tell them that, okay, lack of appetite tends to present as nothing looks good. Okay, don't go by what looks good. Have a default, you know, if it's like, what do I feel like having for lunch? Nothing really. Okay, then I'm gonna just eat this, you know, an Instafood bar or something like that that's just a go-to answer for when my brain doesn't really feel like suggesting anything for a meal. You know, and telling them you should be eating on a schedule. You know, whether you're attracted to it by your appetite or not. You also want to really watch out for another comorbidity is if you've got someone who's got an eating disorder and ADHD, they might be poorly inclined to not have their stimulant med helping them refrain from eating. So insomnia is another problem that happens if the med is in their system when they're trying to go to sleep. Like I said, these are really short-acting meds. They are there and then they are gone. Okay, so the other reason why it's good to start with the immediate acting one is that hopefully it goes on fast enough and off fast enough that you know how long it lasts. And then you can do the math and say, okay, so if I know that this Ritalin lasts 3 hours, then it should not be taken after 4 hours before bedtime, just to be safe. You know, because some kids, they might have a long-acting one through the day, but then need a booster. If you got a teenager and they are working, You want their med on board when they are driving home from work. That does not mean that they get in the car and take the med. Because then they're driving home before it kicks in, and then they're up all night. What you want is them to be able to say, okay, I get off at 10, and the short-acting one lasts for 3 hours for me, so I should make sure to take it at, say, 8. And be ready to be able to drive safely. Now, some people will complain about the kid being very blunted, like a zombie. And if they really are flat as a pancake, zombie-like, that's generally that the dose is too high. And so that's a good conversation to have about, well, how about we scale the dose down a little bit and see if that's any better. You do want to tell, is it really that they're like a zombie, or is it that he's lost his spark? He's not as much fun as he was before. It's like it changed his personality to where he used to be so funny. Like, okay, if I understand you right, you're saying that when he interrupts you with something that is annoying, that's a problem. But when he interrupts you with something that's entertaining, that's good, and you want me to find a med that will only inhibit the annoying interruptions while letting the entertaining ones through, you might want to recognize that that's a really high bar to ask of any pharmaceutical product. And then you talk to the kid and say, okay, yeah, you're less bubbly and talkative when you're taking the med. Do you want or need to be bubbly and talkative when you're taking your math test? Maybe it would be that, okay, yeah, when I need it, then that's when I don't need to be all spontaneous and fun-loving. I need to be getting shit done. And when I don't need it, it's a short-acting med, so you don't necessarily need it then. Going out with your friends, maybe you don't need it then. Maybe you really do, because spontaneity with teenagers might not lead you to the best places, but it can be a choice that you take mindfully. Which brings us to the question of PRN use, drug holidays, the people who will take it Monday through Friday and not on the weekends. And do you hear from people like, oh, I hate it when they take the weekends off because Mondays are terrible? Get that feedback to you sometimes? I've heard that from some teachers. And step one response is, it's Monday, okay? Are you setting a higher bar for your ADHD kids than everyone else? Because if someone else is having a bad day and it's Monday and everyone is crap on Monday, you just go, yeah, they're having a bad day, but if Bobby over here is having a bad day, oh, it must be something wrong, that the med's not working because they had 2 days off. That's not the way it works, okay? It could be that if they take Saturday and Sunday off, they forget to take it on Monday. Okay, that's not a problem taking Saturday and Sunday off. That's a problem not taking it on Monday, and you need to come up with what sort of structured plan to help make sure that they are getting it on the days they come back. Now, a lot of people, kind of have issues with the idea of PRN use. I did it first too. When I first saw this when I was a camp nurse, and orders come in, and one of the orders was for Concerta for a girl who was 12, maybe 13. And it's listed as PRN, and the indication listed was when she asks for it. And I'm like, is that legal? Can we, I'm not comfortable with this. And the other nurse who'd been there for a long time said, wait till you meet the kid. And then I met the kid. I'm like, oh. Now there's a kid who comes through the med line. She wasn't taking the Concerta, but she had to have her vitamins, because God forbid you eat food instead. So she comes through the line on Monday and tells me while she's taking her vitamins that we're going on a field trip on Wednesday. I'm going to have like 6 hours on a bus, and I'm going to need my Concerta on Wednesday. And I haven't taken it in a while. The first day back on it, everything's a little bit too shiny, so I'd like you to put it in the cup for tomorrow as well so that I can get used to it in time for Wednesday. I'm like, whoa. This girl knows exactly what this med does for her, what it does to her, and a really surprising amount of my workflow that she knows to tell me on Monday for it to be ready on Tuesday. So it can really work if the kid is raised into it and trained into it through how people view the meds. And I said there are 2.5 kinds, okay? The second kind is antihypertensives, blood pressure meds. It's like if the stimulants are the steering wheel, these are the brake pedal, okay? To just kind of slow the kid down. If you've got a kid where impulse control is their main problem and they are just bouncing off the walls and they act without thinking of consequences and then they really regret it later, this can slow them down and let them think twice. It is entirely dependent on their second thought being an improvement over the first one and not just giving them more time to plan. But it's also the med that, Clonidine is probably the first psych med I ever gave when I was a nanny, and it blew my mind. Because the parents asked, you know, what I noticed, I'm like, it's like he can think about the consequences before he does things. Which I always thought was kind of an aspect of a person's character. The idea that you could get it from a little blue pill was just really freaking me out for a very long time. But that is what the purpose of them is. Now, they are sedating because they are lowering the blood pressure. And you always have to remember the day job of this one is blood pressure med. So you will taper onto it gradually up to whatever the target dose is. And then if they're going off of it, they need to taper off of it gradually. So there's no drug holidays for this one. Okay, they need to be taking it 7 days a week on the schedule. Clonidine, there is an extended release twice-a-day version of it that insurance sometimes will pay for. But the short-acting one, it's like 4 times a day to take it. 10X is either twice a day or once a day, depending on which one you've got. But, so you're taking it every single day. When they are first taking it, or the dose is first increasing, then they will be sedated. You know, they will be a little bit sleepier, so just give them a tissue for the drool and don't bother them if they're taking naps on their desk. Once they're used to it, you know, a couple days later, you know, maybe a week after they're at the target dose, then that should go away. So if you've got a kid who's still nodding off in class, first thing always, are they sleeping at night? Because that really is something people never think to ask the kids who are falling asleep in class. It's like, well, what time did you go to sleep? Okay, well then that's not surprising, and stop blaming your meds. But if it is that the med is still really sedating them, either the dose is too high on it, or they are missing doses. They're sometimes taking it, sometimes not, and thus keeping their body in that getting used to its sedated state indefinitely. So it can be a problem. The half character of meds are some antidepressants, very specific ones. Strattera was invented for ADHD. It is technically, you know, structurally, chemically, it is an antidepressant. But they never even looked at it for depression. They looked at it just for ADHD so that they could then market it as it's once a day, which it is, 7 days a week. And no one at school needs to know your kid has ADHD because you can give it in the evening. Which is true, but kind of way to reinforce the stigma while you're marketing your med, dude. So I never was too pleased with that. Unfortunately, it also has not been as effective as we hope. Now, if I say something is not effective, I'm not saying that it only works a little bit for everyone. I'm saying that it works wonderfully for very few people. So it wouldn't necessarily be the first thing you reach for, unless the parents are really, really resistant to whatever, or for whatever other reasons. But if truly all the stimulants aren't working for them, this is a perfectly viable thing to try. And it might be that they are someone who responds to it, and it's wonderful, and you know, if it works, it works. We do not mess with success. Wellbutrin is also another antidepressant that includes the dopamine pathways in its function, and therefore also can be helpful with ADHD. We tend to see that more with adults or older teens. The younger kids were pretty much starting with the stimulants anyway. Since they are antidepressants, there's all the stuff about the black box warning around suicidality. It does not cause it, but it might exacerbate it, and the kid might not really have been aware that it was there until it gets exacerbated. Now, once you find a med that works, the real work begins of not giving the med all the credit for everything. Remember, a big part of getting the meds going was so that they could learn other strategies as well and have the meds be one tool in a very large and varied toolbox of options to deal with the symptoms, okay? Their goal is to make the other things the kid needs to do easier. Not that they do it. The kid still gets credit for doing it. You know, you would never dream of a kid finally gets glasses of turning and saying, wow, your glasses read the board so nicely. But that's kind of what everyone says to kids with meds. It's like, oh yeah, that med is controlling your impulses. No, the child is controlling his impulses.
Please pardon the interruption. Administration's aware of the issues with the feedback form. If you could just hold on 1 second and we'll get back to you. Thank you.
That means they're gonna interrupt again later, aren't they? So you gotta recognize, the kid is the one who's controlling their behavior. It's just that the med is making the behavior somewhere in the realm of possibility to control. It's like if you put something on a really high shelf, I'm not even gonna try to reach for it. But you give me a step stool, and now I will start learning the skills of how to stretch for it. So, same sort of thing. We need to work with the parents, the teachers, everyone, including the kid, to help them develop strategies. I love this thing here because it points out what the aspects of the bad things are actually fitting the way the brain works. You know, that like if a kid is fidgeting in a noisy way, the typical reaction is to tell them to stop doing that, as opposed to saying, no, the fidgeting is not the problem, the noise is the problem. So let's find a way that scratches that itch and keeps their hands occupied and busy enough and lets them multitask so that they can focus more without it being distracting to other people. You know, conflict seeking. The kids are always fighting with their siblings. It's because that stimulates the frontal lobe. So put them in a competitive sport and let them do the conflict in a structured way so that rather than saying, brain, stop needing that, find a way to meet the need in a way that is more functional. So when they miss meds, how often have you had where a teacher's like, drags the kid in, past the whole line of other kids and says, call home, he didn't take his med today, I can tell. It's just like, ugh. The one time that happened when I was a school nurse, I wish I'd had the nerve to just look right past the teacher at the kid and say, I am so sorry, she is being so rude and disrespectful to you right now.
This is an update. We have resent the survey. Please check your email. Thank you.
Would you like to go somewhere private to talk about what's going on? You know, instead I was just like, yeah, whatever, go away, woman. And then when I talked to the kid, yeah, he had missed the med. Calling home would not be a solution. I mean, by that point, it's probably too late in the day to take it. And there might be reasons why it was missed. Like, do you guys know how hard it is to get stimulant meds filled? You know, someone sent me an article today about how, depending on who's prescribing them, CVS, Walmart, and Walgreens have been actively delaying filling them. You cannot have refills. Okay, normal med. I prescribe it, it goes to the pharmacy. Or if you bring in the paper one, you give it to the pharmacist, and I can put refills on it, I can put a 90-day supply on it, whatever. If the pharmacist doesn't have it in stock, they say, oh yeah, we don't have this in stock, so we will let you know when we've got it. They go ahead and they'll automatically fill it and let you know when it's available. And you only need your doctor to, send some, they can just phone it in. Their nurse can phone it in. It's amazing how pharmacists never actually check who's on the phone. Pretty much anyone could be on the phone. Oh yeah, the number of times they insist on talking to me and I'm this close to telling my client, why don't you just pretend you're me, because I never asked. But that would not be legal, so I'm trying not to encourage them to do illegal activity. But with stimulant meds, you can only do 1 month at a time. And it has to be either electronically or paper prescription that you bring in. If they do not have it in stock, they will not put it in the queue and let you know when it comes in. They will instead give you the paper back and say, sorry, it's not in stock. So you get to come in and ask them every day. Now you might think, we've got technology, you can phone. If you phone and ask, hey, do you have Adderall 10 milligrams in stock? You got a real good chance that they will refuse to answer. Because apparently every time they get robbed, the robbers phone ahead first to check on supply. I don't know, but they're like, it's a controlled red, I cannot tell you that. You have to have your prescriber call. So they tell me, and then I call, they never check that it's me, and then they give me the answer. I'm just like, ugh. I had a time when I was trying to fill my husband's Concerta every day, not in stock, not in stock, not in stock. Finally, I go in, it's in stock. Oh, but this prescription expired, because it's only good for a month. I'm like, okay, but it wasn't expired when I was bringing it. Well, I couldn't take it from you then because it was not in stock, and I can't take it now. You have to go get another paper prescription from the prescriber in order to fill this. That's the kind of hoops, and if you're an adult with it, they treat you like a junkie. They treat you like you are a horrible, horrible person. And I have one person where their Concerta was getting a prior authorization because, of course, insurance was hoping that he would magically not have ADHD anymore. And so I said, well, GoodRx is good. GoodRx, by the way, is actually really good. The commercials are not lying. Like, how about you just pay 1 month out of pocket, because God knows how long the PA will take. So I call it in, he shows up with the GoodRx thing, and CVS refused to fill it, saying, we can't have you pay out of pocket for more than 3 days. We can only do a 3-day supply. And we're not gonna just give you 3 days out of this 30. You have to have your prescriber call in just a 3-day supply for us to then charge you $30 for those 3 pills, when the GoodRx for a month would have been like 40. PA went through like half an hour later after he paid $30 for 3 pills. I'm like, I don't think that's even legal, because there's laws saying you cannot refuse to fill based on method of payment, but apparently they can get away with pretty much anything by saying it's a controlled substance. We think they are we've had problems with that before. And I'm like, you can see the dude's been filling this every month, and you're the one who told us about the prior auth. Is there really a narrative disconnect here that you can't follow why he's... So yeah, they treat you like garbage, and it can be very hard to get it. So, back to the kid who missed the med. Maybe it is that they just forgot to take it. Maybe the kid got really good at being a reliable, rule-following kid the way they do when they're like 8, 9, 10. And the parents have had the kid kind of on autopilot, where they just kind of leave the cup out for the kid, or the kid, can do it himself because he could do it himself. And they tend to assume that once you acquire a skill, you do not then set it down and walk briskly away from it once you're 12, which they totally do. So you want to make sure, is it that the parents are expecting the kid to take it, and you need to reacquaint the parents with supervising it? Is it, what is the reason why it isn't happening? But for today, when the kid doesn't have it, we need to get the teacher to be willing to go ahead and still educate the child. Because after all, if he wasn't on it at all, you'd still be educating him, one would hope. If you got a kid who's hard of hearing and the battery dies in their hearing aid, you're not going to say, well, I can't do anything with this kid, take them away. You might put the kid closer to the front, you might talk a little louder, and you might get that, yeah, he's not going to get every single thing. But we're going to do the best we can with what we have. What the kid learns, if they are just kind of, get rid of him, he didn't take his pill, I don't want him in class, call home. What they learn is, first of all, this teacher does not like me, she only likes my pill. She only wants me in the classroom when my pill's there. She likes the pill more than me. Kind of makes the kids, honest to God, jealous of their meds, so that when they come to a time where they can refuse it, they do not want to take it, because why would they? It's like, why would you go to a party with a friend that everyone ignores you in favor of? After a while, you'd be like, yeah, I'm gonna leave that home. There's also this idea that if I don't take my med, then I gotta get out of responsibility-free card for the day. A number of times I've heard, yeah, I got in a fight, but I didn't have my med that morning. It's like, that's almost completely irrelevant. You still got in the fight, you still have consequences for getting in the fight. Maybe you'll recognize that if you get consequences for being in a fight, and you get in fights more when you don't have your med, there's your own personal incentive to maybe try harder to remember your med. They don't want to take it, because everyone likes the pill more than them, and when they don't take it, life is easier. They don't have to do anything. Whereas if instead, they didn't take the med, okay, today's the day to practice everything else that you've kind of been ignoring because you didn't need to use it as much. What are the other things you do to stay focused? What are the other things you can do? And look how much harder work it is when you don't have your med. Maybe that'll make you actually think, yeah, I am actually invested in taking it. And I'm someone who can tell when I need it and when I don't. It's not something that other people are imposing on me 24/7 every single dose. But I can ultimately look forward to being an adult who can say, yeah, I need it when I'm doing that, I don't need it when I'm doing that. And not having everyone else telling them, based on your behavior, I want you medicated. So, as I said, if a kid's gonna be driving, they really need to have their ADHD well in control by whatever means necessary. It might be that, okay, they don't have meds, but they would be among the last ones to be driving with friends in the car. Or, yes, you have to play music when you are driving, because without music playing, you're too distractible. The main problem with driving is the impulse control. They have a lot more citations, a lot more crashes, because every left turn looks like a good idea. Intrinsic to ADHD is that boredom is painful, and it kicks in immediately. Sitting and waiting to turn at a light, everyone feels, oh, I'm a little bit disengaged, I'm a little bit it, nothing's stimulating me right now. I might call that bored if it lasted longer. ADHD, it feels like boredom immediately and it hurts. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and make that left turn because it's probably enough space before that car comes. You know? So they're 4 times more likely to be found at fault. That's probably because they're 4 times more likely to be at fault. Gotta grant them that one. Okay? So when we talk about these other strategies and skills, the behavioral interventions, because they are an important part of this. Okay? One is movement helps. Getting up and moving around can help you listen more. It breaks my heart that the lockdown was not a chance for all the ADHD kids at home to find out what works for them. You know, if standing up and going like this while you're listening to what's on the computer helps you listen better, you get to do it without everyone in the classroom going, why don't you sit down? But instead, it was here, sit, stare at a way less stimulating computer screen while your parents stand behind you and criticize you if you start kicking your feet too much under the desk. So, but have a lot more movement and activity. If you've got a kid who is fidgety, don't say, well, you're not behaving very well. I'm gonna let the quiet person take the thing down to the office because I want to reward the good behavior. It's like, no, you give the walking tasks to anyone who really needs to get up and move. You know, if they are getting fidgety, find a reason to let them get up and move. You know, if you've got kids where you know, everyone knows, do you know some kids where if they could get up and just run up and down the hall for 5 minutes, they'd be able to come back to class and focus again? Are you in a school where they'll let you tell them to go run up and down the hall for 5 minutes? I'm so lucky. Most schools won't.
It's a preschool.
It's a preschool. Yeah, and go figure, they're gonna still have that need when it's not a preschool anymore and they aren't allowed to, which really sucks. One thing you can do that's not quite as good, but if you add weight, then it uses up more of that energy without running. So like maybe you got a big box of books and when the kid's getting fidgety, you're like, oh, can you do a favor here? Take this down to the nurse for me, and they carry the box of books down and you're in on it, so you go, oh yeah, this is the one I need. You can take the rest back to class now. And one round trip with a really good box might get them good, but even better would be if there's a place in the back of the classroom where they can get up and go pace. Where they can get up and, you know, walk back and forth if that helps them listen. Sometimes just moving small parts of your body can help, which is where the fidget toys come in. You know, rubber bands on the legs of the chair so that they can sit and play with those. And I had one student who was like, did you notice I'd always slip off my shoes and be like playing with the legs of the desk with my feet? And like, did you notice how I keep stepping in and out of my shoes while I was lecturing? You know, because it's not just the movement, it's also like the sensory thing. It's the varying what you're feeling. It's like, okay, my feet feel the same all the time. If I step out, I'm getting a different sensory input. Now I step back in, I'm getting a different sensory input. And that gives my brain something to think about. You would think it's not that fascinating to think about what my feet feel like, but my brain devotes some amount of time to it, and it's nice to take up the slack and the attention that way. If you can incorporate movement into learning, that's great, because music and rhythm help you remember things more. I saw a brilliant thing where there was a classroom where they had some chant for learning the times tables. And everyone would get up and be clapping and moving and chanting the times tables, and they knew those times tables. I mean, music is, if you can find a song, if you gotta memorize anything, put it to music. I mean, anyone from the generation where we had to write down the preamble to the Constitution in civics class? Yeah, we were supposed to memorize the preamble to the Constitution, and we're all like, well, cool. The main problem was during the test, people weren't humming the song in unison, and it was really annoying me that everyone was slightly out of sync. It's like, we the people, and, you know, we all grew up on Schoolhouse Rock. I'm old. Anyway, and then having fidget objects, things that they can play with. I mean, people call them fidget toys. They are tools. Tools are allowed to be fun too, so yeah, they're also toys. But it might be, you know, putties, stress balls, anything like that that works for them. Come up with a lot of different ones to see what works the best. But they have to be things that are things they fidget with. You know, remember fidget spinners? The worst misnamed thing ever. You know, Jessica has one video that is going through and reviewing fidget objects, and she's like, okay, it's moving and I'm not. This is not what you want from a fidget object. You want something where maybe it moves, maybe it doesn't, but I'm doing the movement. So she'll have, like, I've got a puzzle ring here, you know, a ring that you sit and fidget with, or putty. And the thing thing is, anytime there's a problem with something, and you've got a classroom that's resistant to it because of this problem, you want to say, okay, what is the problem and how do we deal with the problem, other than by banning it altogether? You know, if putty becomes a mess, then you say, okay, kid, can you have the putty be only on top of your desk? And it's up to you to be putting it back in the thing. And these are the rules for it, and if you can't follow the rules, then you don't get to have it. You know? There'll be teachers who'll be like, I don't want to give them a stress ball. If I give you a stress ball, everyone's going to want one. They're really cheap. I don't know how that's an argument against them. And you should not need to have a diagnosis before you can access something that helps your brain work better. And so, yeah. Well, what if they start throwing them? Okay. If you had a kid who was throwing the pen, would you say no more pens for you? You know, you'd go and say, hey, that is not what this is for. You'd take it away for 5 minutes while you think about that, and now can you use it properly? You know, deal with what the problem is. And recognize that when they talk about being a distraction to the class, kids in classes are distracted by novelty and conflict. You know, a new kid in class, kids are distracted by that. You don't ban new kids from joining the classroom, though. You know, and if you've got a stress ball, the kids will be distracted for a day or two. Longer if the teacher keeps fighting with the kid about the stress ball, because now they've got a new show to focus on. I always say, if you've got a kid, like if you've got, Johnny can really listen better if he's sitting on a yoga ball, and he's sitting there bouncing. And kid next to him is like, teacher, make him stop, it's distracting me. The teacher's automatic reaction is, I knew that ball was a mistake. It's very distracting. It's a problem in the classroom. I want to take a step back and say, okay, you have just officially declared that Bobby's ability to focus matters more to you than Johnny's ability to focus. Instead, you might consider sitting down with both kids and saying, okay, when Johnny's bouncing, he can listen better, but it distracts Bobby. It's a community problem. What can we do to solve this? But then they look at you like you're a little bit simple and say, could we maybe not sit right next to each other? Problem solved, and it's really nice, even if you knew that was the answer, to help the kids come up with it, because we'd like them to practice doing that. You know? Or it might be that the moment Bobby knows that it actually helps Johnny focus, it bothers him less. You know, I would always sew to focus in meetings, and when I had someone tell me to put it away, and I started very ashamed, of course, put it away, and the person in the meeting said, no, wait, why do you do that? I said, well, because it helps me listen, otherwise I don't really retain most of what's going on. And the person comes by and said, oh, I thought you were ignoring us really rudely. Now that I know that that's what you're doing, it doesn't bother me. It's like, oh, gee, maybe I should have brought it up 20 years ago instead of being ashamed for so long. So, other changes in the environment. You want to reduce distractions, okay? Sit the kid in the back of the classroom, everyone is between them and the teacher to distract them. So, closer to the front is better. Front and center in the middle is probably not a popular place that they would want to be, but you could be front and to the side. You just want to have as uncluttered a line of sight of what you want them to be looking at as possible. Eliminating clutter in general, at home for them to be able to do homework. Don't have a very cluttered environment, and don't have the clutter be things that are way more fun than homework. You know, don't have the TV in the bedroom if the bedroom is where homework happens. Because even if it's turned off, it's going to be a distraction. You know, if you've got something that you are distracted by, it does not need to be on to do that. They did this great study where they had people come in with phones, and they all had to turn their phones off. Half of them had to leave it at the front desk. The other half could take their turned off phone and have it on the desk while they took a quiz. The people who had their phone turned off on their desk did worse on the quiz, because just having it physically there tugs a little bit at your brain. Having systems in place, strategies, supportive reminders like lists, organizational systems, having routines and schedules. Timers, I don't know if I describe it later, so I'll describe it now. Timers is the Pomodoro technique, because one of the things that's really hard is that ADHD brains do not process time very well. Everything is kind of not yet or forever, pretty much, are the only two times your brain can grasp. And so when it's like, time to do this paper, you don't know how long it's going to take, so kind of part of your brain feels like, well, once you start doing that, you'll never do anything else for the rest of your life. And so, of course, you're putting it off as long as possible before you get locked into the paper writing prison. So if there's a way for you to know that there's a way out that is very soon, that will help. This is why they procrastinate, and then they do lots of good work just before the deadline, because having that deadline looming helps them be engaged, yeah.
There's a really good app called Forest where it lets you grow little plants based on the timer that you select, and if you
Okay, so it's the
interrupt
same
your,
sort of thing, only it's pretty.
yeah, and
Yeah.
if you interrupt it, the plant dies. So
Oh, pretty and also punitive, wow, that's dark, I like that.
it doesn't grow successfully. Is the
You have to stop your paper to go feed the Tamagotchi or it will starve. Well, what I recommend is that they get like an egg timer, because that tick, 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 tick also helps. Nothing like feeling like there's a bomb somewhere in the room while you're doing it. It gives you that sense of deadline urgency. But the way you use it is you set a timer for like 15, 20 minutes. And you're gonna do the thing for that long, and then when the timer goes off, you get to go take a break for 5 minutes. And then you come back and set the timer and do it again. And after a while, you've got repeat tasks, you start to learn that, yeah, this task takes 3 timers. So now my brain knows that's not forever. Or this task takes 1 timer, or you can do anything. It also can be helpful for hyperfocus, because hyperfocus can have that nasty effect where you stop having fun, but you can't stop doing it, or it's getting in the way of doing other things. So if there's someone who's doing a task that they love, but then it becomes a chore, I say you set the timer, and every 15 minutes when it goes off, you're just going, still having fun? Yep, okay, 15 more minutes. Still having fun? No, not really. Okay, 15 more minutes during which time you're cleaning it up and putting it away. Wrap up time, and then you stop, rather than continuing to beat the dead horse of not having fun anymore. And accountability buddies really help. Feeling like someone will notice if I don't get this done is important. But you need to train really good accountability buddies. You don't want people who are like, haven't even started the paper, but you said you were gonna be done with an outline by today. Instead, you want someone who's like, so how's the paper going? And then you answer, and it's like, okay, I'll check with you tomorrow. Because the key to the accountability buddy is the internal, I don't want to have to say I didn't start it. I don't want to have to be saying that I haven't met my goal. So, bullet journals. Who's heard of bullet journals? Yeah. Don't Google them because they're online. You'll see people who have way too much time and artistic skills. It's very intimidating. The basic outline is a blank book that becomes whatever you want it to be. Okay, that's the most basic version of it. Okay. Generally, you take the blank book and you number the pages, or possibly you buy one with numbers in it already because numbering pages sucks. It helps to have a symbol key. If you frequently put symbols by things, great. Have a key somewhere so that you remember later what the heck that symbol means. I've got color coding on spreadsheets that I have no clue what it means. You have, at the beginning, a table of contents. You are now free to write anything you want anywhere in the book, and you will be able to find it. This is so appealing to people whose life is completely dependent on the Post-its on every flat surface in their life. And then they're trying to remember, where did I put that? Where did I? It's like, okay, you can put anything you want there. And you will, as long as you don't lose the book, which is always an option, you know where it is, okay? You have your time logs, whatever they are, whether it's a monthly log, daily log, or whatever, but you have your to-do list, basically. And it's bullets, 1 line per, maximum. If you got more details, you put them on the other facing page, so that you don't get overwhelmed and bogged down in the details trying to figure out what you're doing. Instead, you've got a nice clean bullet list, and at that point, you actually get to the end of the list and can notice that you've just put down 3 weeks worth of work to get done this afternoon. And that starts to help you understand why you're always a failure, because you're always biting off more than you can chew. Now, the really cool thing is this migration thing. And I recommend this for anyone with a to-do list, is that you've got your to-do list, and then whatever next period of time you're going to, it might be day by day. My husband's got one for weekend chores, weekend tasks, so he does it once a week for the weekend. Anything that you didn't do, well, first thing is, go and write down the extra things you did that weren't on the list, because you've got to write it down, cross it off, take credit for what you got done. But then, anything you didn't get done, as you're copying it over, you ask yourself, why did this not get done? Not in a, oh my God, what's wrong with me, why didn't I do it? But no, seriously, what got in the way of this getting done? Is it that it's just too big? Okay, let's break it into chunks and put down just step 1 of it. Is it I don't have the basic prerequisites? I put down paint the living room every day for the last 3 months. Maybe I should put down buy paint as the task instead, because then it might be more likely to happen? Is it that it's got too much baggage? I really resent the fact that this is on my list when it should be on someone else's list. Or I worry about doing this because I think I'll be a failure, and I'm delaying proving that I'm a failure by trying to do it and not being able to. So maybe I need to work through those emotions. And then there's always the option of, maybe I don't need to do this. You know, lots of the things you might have on your list are things that, you know, maybe my books don't need to be alphabetized. Maybe I could just live with my books not being alphabetized. So the advantages are, you know, that it helps you not get overwhelmed, helps you notice if you got way too much, and it is having a format that fits your brain. Instead of going and buying something that everyone's like, oh, you've got to use this, it'll work. It's like, it'll only work if it fits your brain. You know? Find out what works for you. For me, color is very strong. Other people's symbols might be very strong. So you can evolve it to match what you want. Now routines, people are always like, oh, I don't want to be on the schedule. It's not a schedule, okay? Routine is doing the same thing in the same order so that your brain starts to automatically transition to the next step, so you don't need to remember the next step. Because remember, you've only got so much space on your memory shelf in your brain. Imagine if you had to remember each step individually for getting dressed in the morning and had to list them all down, as opposed to having get dressed. Be the list. Because you've learned the routine of what it is to get dressed, and that's why you do them in the same order every day. Sometimes it might be useful, like don't put your shoes on before your pants. Others are like, if you brush your teeth, raise your hand if you wet the toothbrush before you put toothpaste on it. Do you wet the toothbrush after you put toothpaste on it?
She's thinking that.
Her routine is so autopilot, she doesn't even remember it. Notice, the thing is, when I've got a really big group, it'll be about half and half. And the thing is, there is no right answer to that, but whichever one you do, you probably always do that one. Because that's how you save yourself the tedious task of remembering each step of brushing your teeth. It's just, I'm gonna do this, then this, then this, then this, then that. You know, if you take a shower and you wash your body in the same order, then you're less likely to get out of the shower having forgotten to rinse out the conditioner or something. You know, that doing things in the same order primes your brain to automatically expect the next step so you don't have to waste time thinking consciously about it. And there's another video of Jessica's that's linked at the end that is about routines that is just absolutely brilliant how she explains all of it. Come on. Oh, you've been working. Why are you not working now, Advance? There you go. So people think this means that strategies are all you need, right? I hope people at home have someone nearby that you can drag in, because this is a pair-off experience, okay? Because when we go through all the strategies, people are like, great, finally, she's not talking about drugs anymore, she's talking about strategies. All they need to do is try harder on those strategies. And once they are working hard enough on those strategies, they won't need anything else, and they will be able to be normal, and they can stop being, you know, such a problem. And I want you to appreciate the effort, because there'll be people like, well, I know when he's trying really hard to get stuff done. Like, okay, let's see what the experience trying really hard would be. You will now, in pairs, talk with your pair. But as you talk, you must use short words. Each word can be no more than one beat. You know what that means? If the word has 2 beats, your friend goes, eh. So, for 1 minute, talk now.
I want snacks. Snacks? Is it too, I don't know.
Just go. I want snacks, it's fine. You banged too soon. Try one more time. Not again, but try one more time.
See my pen?
I like dogs.
I like dogs, too.
Yeah.
My dog is big.
Other. Is it good?
My
Do you have
girl
fun now?
dog.
Is small.
Do you like this game?
No.
Oh, mine too.
This is what what we would play with my kids in the car for long drives.
This is hard.
Now they won't go to a place like that with me now. So that's kind of what it's like. Okay, how did that feel?
Awkward.
And now imagine, it's kind of like turning to one kid out of the class and picking just one and saying, okay, you go ahead and participate, but make sure that you don't say anything that has the letter T in it. Like, how much could you pay attention to? I mean, while you were talking, what did you talk about? Anything substantive? Not that you'd be allowed to say substantive, but
Dogs.
yeah.
Dogs are pretty dumb.
And if I'd said, okay, now you must talk of books, how well could you engage with actually what's going on when all of your energy is being poured into trying to pass for being someone who's normal in this world of normal where people use only short words? So, and recognize if it was that, someone came looming like I did and goes, whenever you do it wrong, and if you slip up and say a polysyllabic word, no one's going to want to play with you at recess. That's what it can be like to have to focus that hard. So overall, we want to remember that every brain is different. They might tend to close, there's a spectrum there, and okay, so we got neurotypical, but stop trying to get everybody's brain to try and look like neurotypical brains, okay? We want everyone, not just the neuroatypical kids, everyone to figure out how their brain works. Please stop sending them to college not knowing. I was teaching nursing school, and they'd be like, help me study harder. I'm studying, and I don't do good on the tests. So tell me what to do different. I'm like, how do you not know how to study? I don't know how you study. That's your brain. I don't, go look at her notebook. There's a woman who had just glorious color-coded notes. And so go and look at her notebook. And if it kind of engages your brain, then ask her system. It makes you feel like you're about to have a seizure, then go find a different system because every brain is a little bit different, okay? When you are trying something that is helping you focus more, notice that and advocate for being able to do more of it. If you try something and it doesn't help you focus more, notice that and decide, okay, that was worth trying. Not, yeah, I knew that would be a mistake, but see what parts of it work and what parts of it don't work. There's one school where there was a girl who wanted to try and focus more by knitting, but now she was coming up and asking the teacher to help her read the pattern rather than asking about the material more. And they're like, so we think she shouldn't be able to knit. And I'm like, well, no, back up from that. First of all, you tell her if you're going to be a proper knitter, you're always going to have at least like 5 projects going at once. So for in class, you got the one that's just back and forth scarf. And save the more complex ones for other times. If someone is doing the coloring books, and that helps them focus. And then their focus wanders. Instead of saying, see, you shouldn't do that, say, okay, see if you can recognize what it was that made your focus wander. Oh, well, it was when I was choosing the next color, I started thinking about the colors, and then my brain didn't come back. Okay, keep the coloring book, only take one color. You're not trying to make art, just color the whole thing in all one color. If it was, well, the shape was really engaging. Okay, well then, take the colors and have graph paper and just color in boxes or something. Find what works. Recognize what parts of your life are more challenging. That does not mean that you don't have to do them. That is your to-do list, not your excuse of, well, I can't remember what the homework is, and therefore I don't have to do the homework. It's a great way to have the kid never ever do any homework. So it's that I need to work harder, and just because everyone else can do this one easy, if I'm working harder for it, someone ought to be praising me for it. Because if you're working harder, you ought to get credit for it, and not be like, oh good, finally you're doing what everyone else was able to do. What's wrong with you? It's easy. Recognizing that it's hard for other people. So, and we'd like the environment to be allowing for more neurodiversity and not trying to shoebox everyone into the same rows of desks and sit and focus for exactly the same amount of time and so on. Because if we really allowed for a lot more neurodiversity, it's really cool to think of what kind of world we might have if people were free to just explore whatever sparks them. And they didn't have to lock into, this is the one thing that you're going to focus on. They could do art one day, they could do physics another day. They could make things or they could draw things. They could explore all sorts of different ideas. And let their brain, if you only get something kind of half done, and then you get distracted and you move on without finishing it, that's okay too. To see what kind of world you could end up with. Because it'd be really kind of cool. I also think if you've got a kid whose self-esteem has taken a beating from being diagnosed or suspected of being diagnosed with ADHD, as you no doubt know many kids like that, I highly recommend finding for them a biography of Leonardo da Vinci. Because while we're not allowed to like diagnose people from history because, you know, DSM-5 only came out in 2013, the dude's a poster child for ADHD. I mean, look, the number of things that he got half done is just stunning. But he was also like the most brilliant person on the planet. And the fact that kids who have brains that are very similar to his feel like idiots is just wrong. And they ought to be able to feel proud of what their brain can do. And when their brain is doing stuff that they wish it wouldn't do, they ought to be assisted in figuring out how to get control over their brain. You know, you got a 5-year-old with a Ferrari for a brain. Yeah, it's gonna do damage unless they learn how to drive it. But that doesn't mean that you tell them that there's something wrong with their brain. So we have all sorts of nice links that you can use. These are various resources. A lot of them are for kind of adults with ADHD because they need all the support they can get. When it comes to strategies, I do have a whole page that's just the strategies. There's a detailed list of classroom strategies. Jessica did 2 reviews. These are really cool. How to make fidget toys out of like office equipment, you know, office supplies and stuff. You know, out of a couple paper clips and a rubber band kind of thing. How to make really cool ones. That's pretty sure that's Jessica's thing about how to do the Pomodoro technique. This is the guy who invented the bullet journal, so I had to put that up there, but I really like Jessica's description of the bullet journal more. And then I always have videos because Lord knows sitting and reading is hard. So these are, I had to just pick like my favorite 7 off of her channel. So the top ones are various things about ADHD, from how to ADHD. There's various other videos that are good. The TED Talks are kind of hard because people will get into this idea that if you respect people with ADHD, then that means it is a crime to be giving them medicine. You're not appreciating them enough. You're turning them into a zombie. You're trying to change who they are, as opposed to no, I just like them to not crash the car and be able to get through school and do whatever it is that they want to be able to do. You know, help them have the best life they can have. So you tend to get people who are either, if you are medicating your child, then you're a terrible person, or if you are not medicating your child, you're a terrible person. And one of the, I don't know if I put it in here, but I did. Anyhow, one of the videos that Jessica has, if you look for one that is about when she missed her meds, it might be listed when she stopped taking her meds. It was that she ran out and couldn't get it filled because pharmacies. And then when she finally remembered she had a stash somewhere, and she took one, and then she could get stuff done better, and she immediately felt really ashamed. And then she was able to take a step back and say, wait, why am I feeling ashamed of this? You know, if you can get your brain to work fine without meds, yay, more power to you. If you get your brain to work well with meds, yay, more power to you. Rather than having this war between meds, no meds, as if the other side is just evil all the time. And let's see. This one is very dry but practical, very neurologically based, so if you want someone who really likes the science. And if you want to play with the gorilla test tonight with your family, go for it. It is cool. You can only do it once, because after you've seen it, you've seen it. But there's a couple of them out there where they change other things.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, so you saw the gorilla, yay you. Did you notice this and this and this? And there's some where they don't even bother with the gorilla. It'll be like watching a brief play, and then it's like, did you notice this or this or this? And a lot of them are kind of mean, because the selective attention testing that they do does not take into account the fact that people will ignore things even if they notice them, if they make no sense. Like and they'll always put them up as if, how stupid is this person to not notice this change? Like there's one study they did where they'd have someone coming up and asking someone on campus for directions. And while they're talking to this person, some people come walking by carrying a door, and they kind of walk right between them. And while they're walking between them, the person who was asking the directions goes with them, and a different person stays behind in the middle of the conversation. and the second person looks nothing like the first person. And the fact that the other person will just keep giving the directions is held up as how foolish. It's like, on what planet would you expect the person in front of you to change? So of course your brain immediately decides, I must not remember what the person looked like before. I must have, for whatever reason, I thought they were
Clothes and
blonde.
everything were different, everything like this.
Even the gender sometimes.
Yeah. It's like, okay, yeah, because you focus on what you are told is important, and your brain is not prepared for something that just makes no sense. And so your brain is, and it's like, I got the person in front of me. It makes no sense that they changed, and therefore I must be mistaken about my memory of what they looked like before. So it's kind of, I hate it when they're mean about it. So now for the evaluation. Hopefully the evaluation will work. It's now on Google Forms, but the evaluation link there should still work to take you there. And I'm going to peek at chat to see if anyone has questions or comments in chat. One person's bragging about seeing the ape. Yay! Ooh! Now Denise is just showing off. She got the number right and she saw the ape. Okay. But the first comment in there is, did anyone see an ape? I love it. Okay. So, someone asked how to buy my books. The thing is, they are on Amazon, but the way Amazon works is until they sell more, they don't show up very easily. If you put my full name and the title in the search thing on Amazon, you'd see it. So one of them is called Freaks, and the other one is called Yeshu, Y-E-S-H-U. And my name is Julie Love, and if you put the full name and the full title in, then I usually show up in the first page of hits, and I will show you what they look like. Ooh, or so this is what Freaks looks like. Ta-da! And this is what Yeshu looks like. Ta-da! And I have QR codes for them both. Or you can just email me later and I'll send you the link. So. Does anyone else have questions or comments? I know everyone's now doing the eval. So. But once you've jumped through those hoops, if you've got any questions, just pop them into chat. So it's easier than pulling up the QA.
I feel like so many of my adult, most successful friends have ADHD.
Yeah.
Like very, very successful, that been able to like, I don't know, because like once they learn to manage it,
Yeah.
like they can do so much and process so much and like.
Yeah. And it's interesting how it is different in different people. I did have one friend when I started Adderall was like, it's like they're taking away your superpower. Yeah, but I'd like to also be able to, actually my situation is complicated because I also have narcolepsy. So the Adderall is kind of more for the narcolepsy than for the ADHD because I kind of like having my brain go in all directions. I mean, it is a pain when I suddenly realize that I went down a path that resulted in not getting something done that needs to be done. But my job now is so many different things. As long as I'm getting some of them done, it helps. But I have one guy who finally said, oh, maybe I should ask for treatment for ADHD. He first noticed it in himself when he got a job. Not because he couldn't function at the job, but he was a stay-at-home dad, and then he went and worked at, helping someone build a deck. And he's like, I'm at someone else's house, and if there's like unfolded laundry, I just walk past it because I'm not there to do the laundry. I'm there to do the deck. If they haven't mowed the lawn, it does not tug at my brain at all. I can just walk past it and focus on, and he's like, is that what normal life could be, where you get to do one thing until you're done, and then you do the next thing, as opposed to, I'm going to go put the laundry in, and then I see this, and then I take that over there, and then I see this, and you end up at the end of the day with 15 things that all got started and nothing that got finished. Or the number of times that you finish it, but you don't clean up, and it's like, I feel like in our family, we should just buy like 3 hammers and 15 screwdrivers, because to find a tool, you have to remember what was the last thing that got broken, and then go to where it got fixed in order to find the tool, because putting stuff away at the end does not tickle the brain enough to end up happening.
I just started on Adderall like a couple weeks ago, and like within like the day, it was like mind-boggling, like how different.
Or mind-unboggling. Isn't it cool?
Yeah, it was fascinating because I was just like, is this what being normal feels like? Like
Again, we don't like that word, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, is this what everyone else gets to have as their experience? And you want people to be able to self-select that, yes, that's what I want my experience to be. You also want to be a world where they don't have to do that to be accepted. You know, depending on the context. If it's, I want to do this job and this job wants me to do this thing, and this thing goes much better. You know, like I've got one guy who's working in the trades, but go figure, there's documentation that you have to do. So he'll go and be doing the stuff, and then it's like, okay, now you have to sit down and write down the stuff he did, and he's like, so behind on the paperwork. Because being up and physically moving can make it a lot more engaging to engage in stuff. And sitting still is really hard to get the brain to stick around for, depending on what kind of ADHD you have. So I find, and I don't know how much of it is a complex combination of things, but I found I cannot sit and read a book anymore. I mean, I used to. And then as I was reflecting how I used to read so much, and I realized, no, I got a lot of reading done because I had a long walk to school. I was always walking when I was reading. Or when I was very little, I'd climb the tree, and I'd sit in the tree and read, and then climb down. You know, the idea of just sitting like in a chair and reading does not work, because I can't knit, or do something else. But now that I can do audiobooks, I can be like gardening and listening to a book at the same time. And I know that it's still reading. It neurologically does the same, because I've got books where I cannot remember whether I read them or ear read them. And my brain does this very bizarre, quirky thing. It's always fun figuring out the quirks in your own neurology, where it feels that it is vitally important to location stamp everything. I do not know why. And it'll do the same thing. You know, that if at one point I was rereading Dune. It's like I get to a page and I'm like, yeah, 15 years ago I was lying on that cushion in the field house at school, because that's when I was reading Dune before, and when I read this paragraph then, that's where I was. The fact that my brain wastes real estate doing such useless things is very frustrating. But I notice my brain does the same exact thing whether I'm reading things with my ears or my eyes. I'm like, okay, yeah, my brain's processing the story, same old, same old. So yeah. Ooh, people put stuff down here and I wasn't looking. Let's see. Oh, someone else just started meds too. Hallelujah for meds. Yeah. And yeah, meds are not the only answer, and I hate it when people only do the meds. But again, the stigma that's attached to the meds so much is so hard. My daughter's brother goes on and off of meds all the time. I've got a complicated family, that's why daughter's brother is a thing. But anyway, and he will stop taking them whenever there's peers that are calling them his crazy pills. And he's doing better taking them because now he drives. And it's like, you are not driving my car unless you've got meds on board. It's like, yep, okay, so now he's invested in that. I mean, hoping that he's honest is the only little glitch in there. But yeah, it's so infuriating that it's hard enough without having people make fun of you for it. So, everyone should get to be as good as they can. Yay! Okay. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. That was great. Very good.
And there's no other questions happening online, so I'm going to hit stop so my computer has a lot of time to munch on the recording.